how I beat up my grandma. Yes, my grandma, you heard right. Let's get into it. Okay, so boom. I'm a 16-year-old high school student who finds myself at my grandma's house almost every day. My mom's a single mother and works 2 jobs, and instead of leaving me home alone, she always drops me off at my grandma's house. And this has been our routine ever since I was 5 years old. My mom just felt more comfortable leaving me at my grandma's house. But what my mom didn't know is that I'd rather stay home alone rather than going to my grandma's house. My grandma has been beating me up ever since I was 5 years old. She didn't beat me up for any valid reasons. She would just be mad at me for the smallest things. Like one time I broke her glass chandelier while I was playing with my ball and she hit me. Another time I broke her 50-inch TV by accident and again she hit me. Y'all wouldn't believe this third reason why she beat me up. Like for part 2. Part 2 on how I beat up my 76-year-old grandma. Okay, so boom, like I said, my grandma would always beat me up for the smallest things. None of her reasons were valid. She beat me up once for breaking her glass chandelier while I was playing ball. Another time I broke her 50-inch TV screen on accident and she beat me up again. She even would tell me to wash the dishes, and when I would tell her no, because I don't live here, I shouldn't be washing anything, she would once again beat me up for being quote-unquote disrespectful. All this hitting throughout the years and I was just over it, and my mom always siding with my grandma. Well, I'm 16 now and I was over it. My 76-year-old grandma should have learned to keep her hands to herself. So this particular night she told me to study, but I didn't want to study. I wanted to watch TV, so I told her no straight up. And things escalated. Like for part 3. Part 3 on how I beat up my 76-year-old grandma. Okay, so boom, like I said, my grandma told me to go study and I told her no, I wanted to watch TV. She said she was sick of my slick mouth and made her way over to hit me. But this time, oh no, I wasn't going for it. I pushed her away from me, then I punched her on her arms and her face. She fell down and started screaming in shock that I even hit her. Once my mom came home, my grandma told my mom what happened and my mom beat the living soul out of me. And my mom told me if I ever raised my hands to my grandma again, she was going to do more than just hit me with a belt. Truth is, my grandma never hit me unless I was rude or broke something, and that happened very often. Come to find out, I actually suffered from aggressive behavior in children and needed to get treated. Thank God I got treated and I'm better now. And me and grandma has a great relationship now. Don't beat up your grandma.
Story time about how I was almost kidnapped. So a little background information, I was 13 and it was the summer going into 9th grade. I was on a road trip with my family and we needed to stop for some gas. So we stopped at some random gas station and we see this lady get out of her car and walk in. No big deal though. So we're inside and we're waiting in line to use the bathroom. So we were in the front of the line and then that lady was behind us and then there were a few people behind her. So as we're standing in line, she FaceTimes some guy, and then she starts pointing the camera at people around the store, and she would be like, oh, do you like this? And he would say yes or no. Well, then she points the phone at me, and then he goes, yeah, that's the one. And my mom and I were super creeped out about this because she was being super loud and she was taking a really long time at this gas station. So my mom goes into the bathroom and then she starts to talk to me. She starts asking how old I am, where I'm from, and if my mom and I were here with anybody else. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I was almost kidnapped. So like I said, she starts to talk to me and ask me super personal questions. And I'm being vague about everything that I possibly can be. So I go in, I use the restroom after my mom. We grab some snacks and then she follows us around the whole store. And she didn't even use the bathroom. So we leave the store and we saw the car that she got out of and it was parked right next to our car. When originally it was parked all the way across the parking lot. And I'm guessing the man who she was on FaceTime with was in the car. And he was sitting right where my car door was. So my mom and I decided to walk around a little bit, and this lady is just following behind us the whole time. So we call my dad, who was across the street at another store. We told him about the situation, so he comes and picks us up, and then he sees the car pick the lady up, and they start following us. So then they followed us for about 25 to 30 freaking miles, and then they ended up turning off on some random road. And I have a feeling if my mom and I didn't pay such close attention to what they were doing, I would have been kidnapped.
Story time about the girl next door. So around the time I lived in New York with my sister and dad, across the street there was a girl. I never knew her name, but she was really pretty. I had to be 11 and her herself maybe 15, 16. I was always playing outside, and ever so often she came out to take a baby for a stroll. Back then, it never really occurred to me that she was a teen mom Truthfully, I thought that baby was her little sister. And the baby would cry all the time, and she could never get the baby to quiet down. The guy she lived with, which I believe was her dad, would get mad at her when she couldn't quiet the baby down. There was a particular night after 4th of July, the baby was crying, and again, she couldn't get the baby to stop crying. At that time, I was outside jumping rope, and I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was scared that something happened to the baby, but come back for part 2 so I could tell you guys what happened. Part 2 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the baby was crying, and in the middle of the night, I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was afraid that something had happened to the baby, so I ran across the street, and I listened to the sounds behind the front door. The guy that lived there had opened the door, and I fell into the house. He yelled at me saying, "What are you doing on my property?" When I got up and I looked up, the baby was on the ground, and the girl had bruises on her face. I told him I was sorry, and I asked what happened to the baby. He yelled at me, telling me to get out, and the girl got up to pick the baby up, and the baby started crying again. I got scared and ran back across the street. And the next day, the man came back and knocked on my door. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the man came back and knocked on my door. My sister had answered, and he asked my dad, but around that time my dad wasn't home, so he just left. From then on, I was kind of afraid of going outside because I was afraid that the man was going to see me, so for a whole week, I never came out. When I finally decided to go out, I asked my sister to come with me and play jump rope. While we were outside playing jump rope, our neighbors across the street, 2nd floor, blinds opened, and I looked up because the blinds are never open. As we were looking, the words "help me" were on the window, and which appeared to be written in red lipstick. We got scared and told our dad, and my dad immediately called the police, but after the police visited, they told my dad that there wasn't anyone in there. No baby, no girl, just a man living across the street. Said maybe we were seeing things or reading things wrong. It gets really bad after this. Come back for part 4. Part 4 about the girl that lived across the street. I think maybe a month after the incident, I stopped seeing the girl and I stopped hearing the baby. And I kind of stopped thinking about them for a while. I thought maybe her and her little sister moved with their mom and left the guy who I thought which was their dad. I'd say that next year I finally saw the girl, but this time she was much skinnier